Chapter 56. Plans and Threats. Umbridge's face had a hard-pinched look about it, as she sat across from Fudge in his office at the Ministry. She had just given him her first week findings, and needless to say, neither of them were surprised at what she found. "As you can see, Cornelius," she said gravely, "there needs to be some drastic changes made at Hogwarts." "Oh, I agree, he said, as he nodded vigorously. "Fire in doorways, students running amok and doing as they please, lies being spread, and rumors of a murderer being helped and hidden in the castle," he said with a sigh. "So what do you propose, Dolores?" "Make these 2 educational decrees official. It will give me more control at Hogwarts, and it will make it so that the staff and students are forced to listen to me, because right now, they don't take me seriously. Let's see. Educational Decree Number 22. Creation of new staffing post. High Inquisitor. This post gives Dolores Jane Umbridge the ability to dismiss teachers that are of low-quality standards," he said, as he read aloud from the parchment he was holding. "Yes," Umbridge said with a firm nod. "There are a few that are not already giving me problems. That Pierre Robillard won't even let me in his classroom, which makes me believe that he is not teaching the proper material that we asked him to. Minerva McGonagall is downright hostile and hateful towards me, and the others simply ignore me," she said with a huff. "I have threatened that they will lose their jobs, but because it's not really official, they just don't take me seriously." "I agree. You do need more control then," Fudge replied as he signed the bottom of the parchment. "Now what about this one? Educational Decree Number 23. Gives only the High Inquisitor the right to appoint suitable professors to vacant posts with or without the headmaster or headmistress's consent," he read, and Umbridge nodded. "This one will take control of the hiring process away from Dumbledore so that he can't put substandard teachers back into the vacant posts," she clarified. "Another good one," Fudge said as he signed it without hesitation. "Very good. You are a very smart woman, Dolores, so I put my full trust in you to handle this as you see fit. If you think you need anything else, just come to me and I will sign whatever you need." "Thank you, Minister," she said with a smug grin. "I will make sure I do just that. Now, what of the rumors about Potter being inside the castle? If he is in this so-called Chamber of Secrets, then I want him found," Fudge said firmly. "Those 2 children the other day said there is a tunnel to that place from this so-called snake pit, which also needs to be done away with, but before that we need to get into that area to access this tunnel." "Yes we do, and I have tried. Unfortunately though, you need to answer an educational question." Fudge looked slightly startled. "Then what's the problem, Dolores?" She sighed and shook her head. "It's asked in Parseltongue, and it changes to a new one each time one question is answered. Those children that are down there know how to understand Parseltongue. According to my sources, Potter taught them how to understand it in his first year." "Oh," Fudge said. "Yes, I can see how that's a problem. Those children that live down there, Ruffin, Zabini, and Malfoy, see if you can get them to talk." "I'll try, but it will be difficult. Gryffindors are also frequently seen down there as well. The snake pit sits right below the Slytherin common room, and the ceiling is see-through. My sources tell me that the Weasleys, that Granger girl, Longbottom, Creevy, and that weird girl from Ravenclaw are also down there quite a bit. I'm told they mostly study, but I have a hunch that they are talking to Potter." "Well, see if any of them will talk," Fudge repeated. "I will Cornelius, but Ruffin is the ringleader for that group, and he is a foul boy," she said in disgust. Fudge scoffed. "Yes, the one they think is Godric Gryffindor. Such lies, and so many students are willing believe that rubbish. My guess is Potter and Ruffin thought this whole thing up to gain power. Dumbledore was right when he said Potter was dark and dangerous, and personally, I think they have done something to the man." "You think Dumbledore is an unwilling pawn?" she asked in slight surprise. It makes sense," he said, leaning back in his chair. "For nearly 2 years straight he warned me over and over again about Potter being dark and dangerous. Then all of a sudden it was touted that Lucius had used him. Now Dumbledore is all buddy with Potter, and they have teamed up to take out you-know-who? It's just not adding up. It's all lies, and I want to get to the bottom of it." "It's like hey," I said, "I think Potter has made the whole thing up, and he is trying to use everyone's fear of you-know-who against us, but what he's really doing is building his own power base. By using Dumbledore the way he's doing, he can gain people's trust, and when he has it, he can take control of the ministry, and he will probably kill a bunch of people in the process." "So you think that by taking out Dumbledore, Potter's support base will crumble?" "I do, but just in case I'm wrong, I want Dumbledore watched closely. If he is working with Potter on his own free will, then together, they are very dangerous. You-know-who is not back, but they are using people's fear of the man against them to throw suspicion off themselves. We need to let the public know that they are in danger, not from you-know-who, but Potter." "I think you're right, Minister," she said with a nod. "But even if Dumbledore is an unwilling pawn, we still need to get rid of him. Hogwarts has clearly fallen into substandard practices under his leadership." "Oh, I agree with that fully. The man is getting on in years, and I think his age is starting to catch up with him. Especially if we can prove that he is working with Potter on his own free will. That will give us the evidence we need to fully take over control of Hogwarts." "I agree," Umbridge said. "Dolores, just be careful. Potter is a Slytherin, and he is very dangerous." "Minister, I'm a Slytherin." "Yes, I know, but you're one of the good ones," he said, reaching across the desk to pat her hand fondly. "We will need your Slytherin cunning to outwit Potter. He is just a boy, and he is going to make a mistake sooner or later." Umbridge smiled sweetly. "And I will be there to catch him," she said, as she narrowed her eyes in determination. The rest of the meeting they talked about how to go about catching Potter. Fudge decided that having more errors at Hogwarts would be best, and he also said that he would take a trip down into the Department of Mysteries. He had an idea that he wanted to pitch to the Unspeakables. Salazar's new classroom door was an instant hit among all the students. Some had figured out what the key really was, while others were still a bit befuddled on how they were able to gain entrance. It was no surprise to Salazar that all of Ravenclaw had figured it out, but a few in the other 3 houses had also. Salazar was worried that some of the Slytherins who had figured it out would tell Umbridge, but that appeared to not be the case because every class saw her at the door, yelling to be let in. Salazar eventually had to replace his one-way silencing charm with a standard one just so he could properly teach. Umbridge tried asking several students on how to get inside the classroom, but they all said they didn't know how they were doing it. Salazar, and a few other professors, suspected it might have something to do with what Umbridge and the Ministry wanted him to teach in defense. The running theory was, since Salazar warned every class about what the Ministry wanted him to teach, the students that had figured out the key were keeping quiet, especially the ones in 5th and 7th years, who would otherwise fail their OWLs and Newts if the Ministry had their way. They also thought that the others didn't want to spill the beans either, simply because they didn't want to be stuck in a stuffy classroom room reading a worthless book. The surprising thing, however, was the fact that the students took it upon themselves to encourage each other to study defense in either the library or their own common rooms so that Umbridge wouldn't catch wind of what was really going on in the class. In Salazar's 6th-year Ravenclaw class, one of the students had supplied the idea of him passing out Slinkhard's book to all the students, so that they could switch the covers in case Umbridge saw the books. Salazar thought it was a brilliant idea, and promptly did so. According to the Hogwarts rumor mill, some students were actually afraid to switch the covers because they feared getting into trouble with other professors, but others pointed out this was okay to do, seeing as Professor McGonagall was teaching her first years the switching spell first, as opposed to matchsticks into needles like she always did. That small bit of logic seemed to quell their fears, but according to the rumor mill, if anyone were to outright ask Professor McGonagall if this was why she had suddenly switched up her lesson plans, they would only be answered with a smirk. That only made the students giggle, and shortly after, another rumor cropped up. The rumor was that Professor Robillard and Professor McGonagall were secretly dating. Salazar was pretty sure Godric had started it though. Because of the falling standards at Hogwarts, Ministry issues educational decrees. Salazar sat fuming as he glared at the morning paper that had just been delivered. All along the house tables, people began whispering about educational decrees 22 and 23, and what it could mean for their life at Hogwarts. Albus looked outraged. Minerva looked ready to explode, but everyone cried out in shock when the temperature in the room suddenly plunged to freezing, and the enchanted ceiling began to form dark angry clouds. When a smug and smiling Umbridge walked into the room, a loud thunderous boom sounded as the enchanted ceiling exploded into a full-fledged thunderstorm. Umbridge shrieked loudly, as several students cried out in shock and dove under the house tables, but Salazar glanced at Godric, who was near about to murder the woman where she stood. "Gordy!" Fred shouted over the noise from the ceiling. "Gordy! Gordy!" Colin yelled, as he banged on the table. "Godric Gryffindor!" Hermione bellowed, causing a momentary lull in the chaos as Godric's size snapped to her shivering form. "Please, you're really scaring us," she said nervously, as she cancelled the voice-amplifying charm and looked towards the ceiling. "Can you make not so cold too?" George asked, looking a bit apprehensive as he shivered against the freezing temperature. Godric took a good look around the great hall and grunted, but then, as if nothing had happened, everything returned to normal. "Bloody hell, and I thought Potter's exploding house tables and windows were crazy," Lee Jordan shouted from across the room at the Gryffindor table. No. Potter did the same thing in first year during Christmas holiday while everyone was gone," Ron corrected loudly, as he sat at the other end of the table. "That's because you almost killed Nora," the twins replied, as they swooped over to the Slytherin table where Godric was sitting. "He got that trick from me," Godric said, as he stood up and threw the paper to the floor. "Are you all right, Mr. Ruffin?" Albus asked, glancing at the still irate Godric, who had just set his paper on fire. "Yeah, I'm fine," he growled, then he glared at the shaking Umbridge. "Just so that you are warned, woman," he said as he pointed at her. "I'm watching you closely." "I don't care who you pretend to be, Mr. Ruffin," she said angrily, as she stood there with a scowl on her face, "but you are just a student, and you have no authority here." Godric stared her down, and drew his wand. Salazar was quick to stand, but he never took his eyes off Godric, who brought his wand to the palm of his hand. Hogwarts. Activate Gryffindor security enchantments. By the blood of. Salazar took no chances and shot a stunner at Godric, who seemed to have expected it, and managed to turn at the last second to cast a shield. He glared at Salazar, but Salazar stood firm as he returned the glare. "Salazar's not here to stop you, Godric, but I am. Now, cool your temper," he said as Godric stood there seething. "You know I'm right, so just stop and think about what you are doing. Under normal circumstances, I could care less if you called forth your enchantments, because I would love to see how that woman would react, but let's not give all of Hogwarts's secrets away just yet. Voldemort needs to be kept clueless about some things. He knows about Helga's badgers, because Salazar called them forth in first year. He also knows about Emeralda and Rowena's enchantments, but let's not give him yours. There are some people in here who will run right to Voldemort, and they will blab. Now calm down. Besides Cordy, you can always make more lions to run Umbridge down." Colin, who had already been told the story about the Aurors and lions, shouted. "A Gryffindor is not above pulling the same trick twice," Neville yelled. Blaise snorted loudly at this, but Hermione bit her lip nervously as she slowly came up behind him. "Cordy, Professor Robillard is right. You know he is. Don't let the stupid ministry get to you. You and Harry are better than this," she said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Don't sink to their level." Godric, however, ignored them all as he continued to glare at Salazar. "You're not perfect, you know." "I never said I was. I've made many mistakes, and have lost my temper too," Salazar replied calmly. "I know that I'm not as old as you are. I haven't lived for 1,000 years in one form or another, but I'm also not afraid to stand up to you. I was taught by Salazar in his former life, and I was taught by you as well," he added, as he looked into the eyes of his best friend. "It's like you said the other day, let the ministry make fools of themselves because in the end, it will be all right. We know it will." "Is that something Merlin has seen?" "I know he's a seer because I read a book about him," Colin asked loudly, causing Neville to face-palm himself. "That boy has no filter on his mouth," he groaned. "Colin!" Blaise shouted. "Be quiet." Colin paled drastically and clamped his hand over his mouth, but it was enough to make Godric snort loudly. "It's all right, Colin. Thanks to Lucius Malfoy, Voldemort already knows about Merlin," Godric said. Salazar's eyes snapped to Godric in surprise, but since Godric wasn't on the ground screaming in pain because of the unbreakable vow, he guessed that Merlin was ready to make his presence in the wizarding world known. He really needed to keep up with that old man's plans. "This is all lies," a formerly shocked and speechless Umbridge suddenly cried. "You, Mr. Uffin, are not Godric Gryffindor, and Harry Potter certainly isn't the great Salazar Slytherin. And now you want to throw Merlin into all this?" "Merlin created a ritual that gives him, Salazar, and myself immortality," Godric said, as he calmly glanced at her. "Every 150 years we die, only to be reborn into another child. We grow up, attend Hogwarts, and continue on in one form or another. It's what we've always done. We keep our knowledge of who we are all during our childhoods, but when we get our Hogwarts letters, that is when we get all of our real power, spell knowledge, and abilities back. It's why the killing curse bounces off of us. We are safe from all forms of death, until the age of 150. I would volunteer a demonstration, but I'm not one to shoot of killing curses in a room full of children." He sneered, causing Umbridge to narrow her beady eyes. Voldemort found this out the hard way when he attacked the Potters all those years ago. It's why Salazar survived. Salazar knew what was going on at the time, but because he was so little, he couldn't tell his parents that everything was going to be all right. He couldn't warn them to save themselves. He knew the killing curse would bounce back and hit Voldemort. Voldemort tried to kill him again in the graveyard, and when the curse bounced, it missed Voldemort and hit Pettigrew. "Lies. All lies. This is just all lies," Umbridge sputtered loudly. "It's not lies," Hermione shouted. "Everyone knows that Merlin was a Slytherin, and everyone knows that Merlin is famous for what he did with the Mole King Arthur, and how he defeated Morgana. All of that stuff happened centuries before Hogwarts was ever created. Merlin is immortal, and so are Salazar and Godric," she cried, which instantly caused a stir among the rest of the student population. Ravenclaws were already putting their heads together to discuss this latest bit of news. Hufflepuffs were shocked speechless, as were the Gryffindors, but many in Slytherin looked hopeful at this news, while the rest looked downright fearful and angry. "Lies, lies, lies!" Umbridge shouted frantically. "You sound like you know who Dolores." He said the same thing when Potter told him who he was in the graveyard. Minerva said offhandedly. "I know that because I saw Potter's memory of the encounter." "What was that potion you know he used to regain his body, Mr. Uffin?" "It was invented by Morgana, so it was hardly original," Godric said with a scoff. "Trust me, Merlin was a bit miffed about that, because he has spent the last 1700 years trying to track down all of her works, so they can be kept out of children's hands, and by children I mean witches and wizards like Voldemort. he said with a smile. Salazar grinned at the both of them and shook his head, but knowing that Godric had finally calmed down, he felt his muscles relax just a bit and he sat down with a chuckle. "Gordy, are you sure Harry isn't dead? Because I still do think the Ministry somehow killed him. I have not seen him at all," Sirius said, looking at Godric with pleading eyes that nearly made Salazar snort. "I told you, Sirius, Salazar is here. That's why I kept encouraging you to take the job," Godric said with a smirk. "He'll probably sneak into your cottage in the middle of the night to prank you. I suspect that right now, he's biding his time." "That sounds like Harry," the twins shouted as they grinned. "Madam Umbridge," Albus said with a twinkle in his eyes. "When you go to tell the Minister about all this, do make sure you tell him to let the Eras, who are sure to show up, know to watch Sirius's cottage closely. I do think that if he turned up in class with bright purple hair, it would cause a large distraction. We simply can't have that because the children shouldn't have to put up with such horrendous things while they are trying to learn." "That did it?" Salazar burst out laughing. "Sirius with purple hair is a horrendous thing to think about," Salazar said, causing Sirius to grin. "At least I have hair. I told you all before, being bald is a personal choice," Salazar said dismissively. "I bet you lost it all to a prank," Neville shouted. 20 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Longbottom," Salazar shouted, causing the professors to chuckle. 21 points to Gryffindor, for Mr. Longbottom's excellent comeback, Sirius shouted, causing all the Gryffindors whoop and cheer, and the rest of the students to burst out laughing. "This is preposterous," Umbridge shouted as she looked around in complete and utter disgust. "You are professors. You should be conducting yourselves in a professional manner. There is nothing in the rule book that says we can't have a sense of humor," Flitwick said calmly, causing Umbridge to glare at him. "But according to what you just said, as High Inquisitor, you shouldn't be screaming like a mad woman in the middle of the Great Hall," Hermione snapped, turning to face Umbridge with anger flashing in her eyes. "You watch your mouth, girl," Umbridge said, jabbing her stubby finger at Hermione. "Or I will." Albus stood up so quickly that he turned his chair over. "You may have some power here, Umbridge, but you will not threaten my students," he said with barely controlled anger. "I'm in charge here, Dumbledore, and I will do as I see fit. I will get rid of whom I feel is unfit to teach. Even if it means getting rid of you," she said with loathing. The twins, Cedric, Blaise, Neville, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Colin, Dennis, and surprisingly, Luna instantly jumped up and all rounded on her as they drew their wands. Umbridge looked at their furious faces, and shuffled backwards as she glanced at them fearfully, but before they could say or do anything, Dumbledore put his hand up to stop them. "Children, I know you want to defend me and I thank you so much for that, but there are other ways to handle this," he said, looking at each of them individually. "I do believe Harry would be most displeased if you got involved with this fight. This is between Godric, Salazar, myself, and the Ministry. It's not your fight." They all nodded, but then a wicked gleam flashed in Godric's eyes and he instantly grinned. "Yes, it is. However, according to that slippery, slimy reptile, being a Slytherin is the greatest thing of all, so use your heads and let Harry handle this in the best way he knows how, with cunning. There is absolutely no need for any of you to be involved with anything that is going to happen here. You have OWLs and Newts to worry about, so you need to concentrate on those. However, as Salazar always says, I'm a bloody Gryffindor, so I can't help what I'm about to do," he said with a wicked grin. Salazar glanced at Godric sharply, and instantly became nervous because of the look on his face. Godric now had a manic grin plastered on it, and it made Salazar a tad bit uneasy. "Attention all Hogwarts's ghost. May I have your attention please? Would the Friar, Baron, Sir Nicholas, and Helena Ravenclaw please report to the Great Hall? Peeves, You have exactly 20 seconds to be here as well, and if you don't show up, Salazar and I will banish you. You have been warned. The ghosts must have been listening in the entrance hall, because no sooner had the words left Godric's mouth, they came floating through the back wall. Peeves, on the other hand, waited exactly 20 seconds before he lazily floated into the room, much to Godric's irritation. However, he looked at them all and nodded. I mainly called the four of you here so you can be witnesses, but I also want confirmation. I know that Salazar is in here listening right now, and he is watching Umbridge threaten this school, and all its residents. He, nor I, approve of any of this nonsense. To the best of your ability, are you willing to assist Salazar in all that he wishes to accomplish here? I speak for all of us when I say, yes, Godric, Uncle can count on us, she said, as a small smirk graced her lips. You and Uncle always drove Mother crazy with your silly stunts and pranks, so whatever Uncle decides to do to Umbridge will be supported by us. This woman, she said distastefully as she motioned to a furious Umbridge, is a complete disgrace. Whatever Uncle does to drive her right out of your school, we will support with pride, she said. Then she turned to Umbridge. You and your ministry picked the wrong school to mess with. You and your cohorts will pay dearly, and when Uncle is through with you, I hope you suffer, she hissed. Then she deliberately swooped through Umbridge, causing her to visibly shiver. And what does Lord Gryffindor wish old Peevesy to do? Peeves asked as his beady little eyes shone brightly. Godric grinned at the poltergeist. This will be the only part I play in this, Peeves. After this, I wash my hands of it and will let Salazar do what he sees fit. With that said, Peeves, I want you to do what you do best. I, Godric Gryffindor, give you free rein. Make that woman's life hell, he said, as he pointed right at a white-faced Umbridge. Peeves nearly quivered with glee as he turned to face her. With pleasure, Lord Gryffindor, he cried, as he began slowly advancing towards her. Salazar took the opportunity to cast a quick notice me not charm on himself, and then he grinned as he cast the voice-amplifying charm. I, Salazar Slytherin, do hereby declare war on Umbridge. Hogwarts, do you acknowledge? Bong. Just as the bell in the bell tower finished its ominous sound, all the children jumped to their feet. Harry! They all cried with happy faces. You really are alive, Sirius said, jumping up from his seat as he stared around the great hall with wide eyes. Someone tell me what he said. Hermione grinned at him. He said, I, Salazar Slytherin, do hereby declare war on Umbridge. Hogwarts, do you acknowledge? And the bell tolled. She exclaimed, as all the others grinned happily. Harry is innocent, Colin shouted. What? Umbridge shrieked as she nervously glanced around the great hall. Yes, war, Sirius said as he grinned maliciously. Perhaps I should make it a bit clearer, Albus said, as he stood up with twinkling eyes. While Harry Potter might be the reincarnated soul of Salazar Slytherin, he is still James Potter's son. As I understand from Miss Ravenclaw's words a moment ago, Salazar was a brilliant prankster. It seems fitting almost, that a brilliant man and prankster like him would be born to one of the greatest pranksters of our day, James Potter. In other words, Madam Umbridge, Harry Potter, also known as Salazar Slytherin, has declared a one-sided prank war. I do feel most sorry for you. And Peeves is here to help you, Lord Slytherinus, the poltergeist shouted. This is madness, Umbridge screamed. Complete madness. I'll have Harry Potter arrested by the end of the day. I swear I will. And as for you, Dumbledore, the minister was willing to believe that you were being controlled by Potter, but I see here and now that you are doing this under your own free will. Only the headmaster can control the ghosts and the castle, so this is your doing. You put these ghosts up to this. It was you who asked them to go along with this nonsense so that you and Potter could keep spreading the lies you all have been spewing. There is no immortal founders or Merlin, and you know who is not back. This is a plot to take over the ministry, and you're all involved in it. "And you call us mad?" Cedric said as he burst out laughing. "Oh, I can't wait to see what Harry does to you. You can expect a team of Roos to be here by sundown." Umbridge hissed, as she ignored Cedric completely. "I will warn you only once. Anyone caught aiding the convicted known murderer Harry Potter will also be arrested. Harry doesn't need our help in any way, shape, or form," Hermione said with a bit of snootiness. "He's perfectly capable of taking care of himself. Just because you keep denying it doesn't make it not true, but Harry helped build this castle. He knows its every secret, and you will never find him." "Oh, we will see about that, you nasty little girl," Umbridge spat, as she began marching out of the Great Hall with her head held high. Umbridge didn't get far though, because Peeves dropped a whole bowl of oatmeal on her head, which caused the entire Great Hall to burst out laughing. She started screaming again, and ran out of the room. Hermione narrowed her eyes as she watched the woman leave, and even from his seat, Salazar could see Hermione's nostrils flare with determination. From the look in her eyes, Salazar knew exactly what she was thinking. The children were going to spearhead a campaign to get rid of that woman. This was all misdirection, that to him was plain as day. Harry Potter was a good scapegoat, seeing as no matter how hard the Ministry tried, they would never find him. It must have been something that they and Godric had come up with, and Salazar was willing to bet all of his galleons that Albus was on board with the plan, and if he wasn't, he soon would be. It was genius, really. It would put all the suspicion on Harry and it would leave the children free and clear to carry out all of Harry's pranks. It also shielded all the professors as well, and hopefully, if all went right, they would all still have their jobs at the end of the year. It was Saturday night, and it was the second regular meeting the Order had held since term started, which had only been in session for 2.5 weeks. They had already discussed several things, one of which was alerting the rest of the wizarding world to the Founders and Merlin's presence. Merlin said was a good idea, after listening to Neville's reasoning about it being worth it if one life was saved. Godric informed the Order about Luna's father, and they said it was a brilliant idea, so everyone signed off on getting the story to the Quibbler, especially now that Nahum was back to normal. If Rita agreed to everything, Albus was going to offer her shelter at Hogwarts so that she would be safe. As an added bonus, since Salazar had told everyone about her animagus form, Amelia said that when all was said and done, she'd be willing to waive the fee if Rita helped. Now it was all up to Rita. The children notified everyone that they were going to get started on the pranks soon, but they just wanted to give Umbridge a false sense of security before they actually started. The twins announced that they had been elected as the presidents of Chaos and any and all pranks and suggestions had to be ran by them before they were okayed. Apparently Hermione was vice president, and Blaise and Neville were advisors, while Cedric, Ginny, Ron, Luna, Colin, and Dennis were troops. They said that they were looking into getting more troops, but they wanted to clear everything with all the professors before they actively started recruiting. Albus's twinkling eyes and grin were all that was needed as far as permission went. Minerva said that if they needed anything to not hesitate to ask, but if it looked like they were going to get caught by Umbridge, or any of the Arres that were currently wandering around the school, then they needed throw either herself, Albus, or Godric under the bus in order to save themselves. This didn't go over well with the children, but both of the professors and Godric were firm about it. It was better for them to be dismissed, than for the children to be expelled, because if they did get expelled, they would not be able to take the OWLs and Newts. Hermione tried to point out that Godric needed his OWLs and that he needed to be around to protect Draco, but he only glared at her and she finally gave up the fight. It was after that Amelia went dropped a bombshell in their lap. "Just be careful, because I have been told something that is going to give us a ton of trouble," she said gravely as she glanced around at everyone. "Fudge has gone to the unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries, and asked them to look into making glasses that work exactly like Alastair's eye." This caused everyone to stop and stare at her with wide eyes, but Minerva looked at Moody in shock. "I thought your eye was one of a kind?" she gasped. "It is," he said with a nod. "But everyone knows how it works, and the unspeakables are good at creating spells. I have no doubts that the unspeakables can pull it off." "How far can you see through a wall?" Salazar asked. "Roughly 3 meters, or 10 feet if one was more inclined to say," he said gruffly. "So if I'm running around helping the children with their pranks, and I disappear down a shortcut, they can see me?" Salazar asked. "Yes, and they will know where every shortcut is located," Moody replied. "But they won't know to access them," Hermione pointed out. "We do, and if they happen figure one out, Harry or Gordy could change it." "That is true," Salazar and Godric said together. "Not to mention, they won't know where we are. We have the map, so we can work around them," George said. "Is there a way to make more copies?" Blaise asked, looking at Sirius with hope. "Because we are all going to need one." Sirius tilted his head to the side and thought for a moment. "I can try to make more copies, but James and Remus were the ones who did most of the work, and with James anyway and Remus off with the werewolves, it will be difficult. You can't just make copies like you would a book, because the charms on the map won't replicate." "But you could still make copies of the map and charm it accordingly, right?" Hermione asked. "I think so, but I can't promise anything," Sirius said, causing her to sigh loudly and nod in understanding. "You do have one advantage over them that you don't have with me," Moody said. "If they are getting glasses then obviously they can't see behind them. My eye can spin 360 degrees, but their glasses won't be able to do that. So always stay behind them," Blaise said with a nod. "We can do that," Fred said. "Remember, I can see through disillusionment charms, invisibility cloaks, wood, metal, fabric, anything." "Is there anything you can't see through?" Godric asked. Moody sighed loudly. "There is a few things I can't see through." "Like what?" all the children asked eagerly, which caused Moody to glare at them. Albus chuckled. "It is up to you whether you want to tell us, Alastair." "I can't believe I'm about to do this," Moody grumbled, but then he sighed loudly. "I can't see undetectable charms such as the undetectable extension charm, Fidelius charms, and unplottable locations. I also can't see through any physically transforming abilities such as Polyjuice, Animagi, and Metamorphmagus." "Polyjuice," Fred said as he rubbed his chin. "We will need to disguise ourselves as random moles, so that they can't recognize and identify anyone." "I can help you there," Merlin offered. "I'll go into London and pluck hairs from people who are about your sizes." "Thank you so much," Neville said with a grin. "We just need help with the potion," George said. "I can make some, if I had the recipe," Hermione said, as she grinned sweetly and batted her eyelashes at Severus. "No. Oh come on. Please Professor Snape," the children begged. "I just need the recipe, and help getting the rare ingredients," she said, causing Salazar to snicker. "No," he repeated with a smirk. They all scoffed and rolled their eyes, but then they grinned innocently at Salazar, Godric, and Merlin, who all laughed. "Yes," Salazar said, causing them all to cheer. "But I will brew it, so that I know it is done right," he added, causing Hermione to huff loudly, but she was grinning nonetheless. "You'll need to leave it for us somewhere when it's ready," Neville pointed out. "The room of requirement," Hermione said instantly. "It's unplottable, and it gives you almost anything you need. It creates tunnels too, but be careful if you need to ask for one, because if you don't ask for one big enough, you'll get one where only an ant can get through," Godric warned. "So if we needed a tunnel to the Gryffindor common room, we could make one?" George asked with wide eyes, which caused Salazar to nod. "You can make one to anywhere," It's how I got into the underground chambers to get the stone in first year. Salazar said. Oh dear, I don't like the sound of this. Minerva said nervously. Professor McGonagall, Fred said as he stood up with a bow, you have our word that we will not use our knowledge of the castle for nefarious purposes, other than to prank Umbridge or the Aurors. And the sons and daughters of Death Eaters, Blaise added with a smirk. She glared at him and huffed, but didn't say anything as George began to speak. We also won't disrupt class time, although we can't promise not to cause a slight disruption to the calm and tranquility of normal school hours, but we will do our best not to. George grinned. Once again, she only raised her eyebrow at them and huffed slightly, but Albus and the other professors chuckled lightly. I better not wake up one morning to find my common room pink, Severus warned. Whose common room? Salazar asked with a grin. If anything happens to Slytherin House, you can bet your last galleon that I will be responsible for it, he said, causing the children to burst out laughing. Then nothing better happened to me, Severus emphasized. It won't, Fred said, and for once he was being serious. None of you have to worry about being pranked, unless we ask you beforehand in order to cover our tracks, or something like that. This can be pranking your person, classrooms, or offices, but if you say no, we won't do it. Don't worry, Professor Snape, we won't bother you, Blaise snorted. See that you don't. That doesn't apply to me though. Salazar grinned, causing Severus to glare at him. Snape has purple hair, Sirius sang, causing Severus to shift his glare to him. Don't Sirius, just don't, Neville said, shuddering at the thought. Moody cleared his throat loudly, which caused them to sit up and pay attention again. Right. Fudge. Unspeakables. Glasses, Fred muttered. How soon will they have them, Amelia? Moody asked. They will be given to Aurors and myself, which I think is good because we can study their limits here. However, I don't know when they will have them ready. All of the unspeakables have been pulled into this project, so it could be a week, or 6 months. It just depends on how fast they get them created, she said apologetically. I will let you all know as soon as I know something, and I will keep you updated on their progress. It's all we can ask for, Albus said with a sigh. All right everyone, I do believe this concludes our meeting. Have a good night. They all got up to leave, but Salazar ran to catch up with Moody just before the man paraded away. The wind was howling fiercely, so there was no danger of them being overheard, but Salazar cast Severus's Muffliato spell anyway. I know it's visible right now, but I need to ask. If I can see through the notice me not charm on your forehead when you are in adult form? Moody asked with a twisted grin. Bugger, Salazar mumbled. Hermione couldn't find a beautifying charm that suited my needs, so I went with this classic one. It was the best I could come up with, without spending a few weeks creating one. I just didn't want to take the chance the mole makeup would wear off, or smudge. I don't blame you, but yes, I can see the scar. What do you suggest? Salazar asked, looking at him hopefully. Wear a hat and keep your head down when you walk by the Aurors, but even then it's not a guarantee because they may be able to see it through your skull, Moody said with a sigh. They may not think about it because they are looking for a boy, not a man. However, that scar is so well known, they may put it all together. Damn. I hate hats, Salazar grumbled. If I could put the scar under a Fidelius I would, he said with a chuckle. You and I both know that can't be done, Moody snorted. Salazar shook his head miserably and sighed. All right. Thank you. I'll try and figure something out. Good luck, Potter, Moody said, patting him on the shoulder just as he paraded away. Salazar sighed and stared off into blackness of the dark sky. He didn't know what he was going to do about this situation, but he knew he needed to find a solution and fast. He sighed again and shook his head, but then he grinned as he remembered that he needed to discuss something with Merlin. He had an idea for a prank that could start the children off right, and he needed Merlin's help to do it. It was Sunday morning, and Salazar grinned as everyone calmly ate breakfast in the Great Hall. Arrows were patrolling all over the castle and grounds. There were also a few in the Great Hall, but he knew those could be dealt with fairly easily. He hadn't expected to be able to do this prank so soon, but when Merlin told him he had already brewed a slew of potions, Salazar was delighted to discover that one of them was polyjuice. He looked up at Merlin somewhat apologetically though, as the man sat next to Sirius at the head table. Merlin had to drink polyjuice made from Salazar's fingernails, seeing as Salazar was bald and didn't have any hair to offer. He wrinkled his nose on instinct just thinking about it, but he was grateful his friend had done it. Right now Salazar was using the polyjuice rock to look like Harry, and he was standing disillusioned in the very back corner of the Great Hall. He was surveying where all the arrows were, and looking for the best way to escape. He grinned to himself as he thought of everyone's soon-to-be shock faces because no one besides he and Merlin knew what was about to happen. Sneaking up the side of the Great Hall next to the Gryffindor table, he was careful not to bump anyone as he made his way to Sirius, who was happily chatting with Merlin, or rather Pierre. Salazar could barely hold back a snort as he stood right in front of the man. "This is going to be funny," he thought. With one swift motion, he cast the flame-freezing charm over himself, and then in the next second, surrounded his body in a large ball of flames. Sirius yelped loudly and jumped backwards, almost knocking over his chair and falling to the floor, but just as the flames began to die down, Salazar reversed the disillusionment charm, and grinned at Sirius. There was a moment of stunned silence as everyone in the Great Hall stared at him in shock, but Salazar snorted loudly. "Oh look, bacon!" he cried happily, as he swiped the bacon from Sirius's plate and began munching on it. "Harry!" Several happy voices cried out together, which broke the silence in the still stunned Great Hall. "Harry Potter! Arrows! Arrows! Seize him! Seize him!" Umbridge screamed frantically, as she jumped up from her seat. "Well, gotta go!" Salazar shouted, as he waved to all the children, who were close to dying with laughter. Sirius still hadn't recovered yet, and he just stood there open-mouthed, as Merlin laughed at him. Salazar quickly disappeared in another ball of flames, and ran around behind the head table. Merlin took it as his cue to fire several unseen banishing charms at nearby goblets, plates, and platters of food in order to give off the illusion that Salazar was running for his life. The Arrows and Umbridge bought it hook, line, and sinker. Salazar stood off to the right of the head table, far back against the wall to survey the chaos, but he couldn't believe it when Susan Bones suddenly jumped up out of her seat. "He just bumped into me," she shouted, and began furiously trying to grab the air around her, as if trying to catch a hold of him. "Get him! Get him!" Umbridge screamed, as the Arrows swooped down on Susan, and Salazar saw her shoot a grin at a laughing Cedric, who nodded approvingly. "Run, Harry, run!" Colin and Dennis screamed frantically from the Gryffindor table, as they jumped up and began hopping around in order to see what was going on. Salazar clamped his jaws together to keep from laughing as the Arrows literally ran around in circles, tripping over each other in their haste to try and grab him. 3/4 of the Great Hall were nearly in tears because they were laughing so hard, and the professors were chuckling and smiling, but Minerva, Poppy, and Severus were looking at Pierre in slight confusion. Sirius's bark-like laugh was easy to pick out above all the others though, because he seemed to have finally come to his senses. "I haven't seen you in 3 months, and the first words out of your mouth when I do see you is, 'Oh look, bacon!'" he shouted happily as he wiped tears of laughter from his face. "It's brilliant, Harry." "Well, I hope you didn't expect an hour-long conversation, Sirius. I mean, I am a wanted man after all," Salazar said with a snort. This made all the Arrows pause in their tracks as they stared around with wide eyes, hoping to spot him. Umbridge was seething, and even from this distance, he could see the spittle flying out of her mouth. Jiggles were heard all over the great hall, but Godric's burst out laughing. "I told you he was a slippery, slimy reptile." "Thank you for those kind words, Godric. I take them to heart and wear them proudly." "Where are you?" Umbridge screamed furiously as she stomped her feet. "Why, I'm over here, or over the maybe. I don't know, I seem to be lost. Why don't you ask Nora? She can see me." He laughed, as Merlin banished a couple of platters of food in different directions. "Speaker, you better not get caught," she yelled from the Gryffindor table where she was sitting with the twins. "I won't, my dear, I promise," he replied, as the children burst out laughing. "Hogwarts, my lady, if you would be so kind as to drop the anti-disapparition jinx on the Great Hall only, that would be lovely. I do need to make my escape after all." Bong. "Thank you, my dear. Now, if you will all excuse me, I have to escape. Hogwarts, please replace the jinx when I have left. For those of you who are wondering, I'll arrive at the front gates. I will of course double back and re-enter the castle. Until next time, my friends." "Salazar, you snake. Stop teasing them." Godric laughed. "I can't help it, Godric. It's just who I am. Gotta go now. Bye, bye." Then with a purposely loud unmistakable crack, Salazar apparated, and left the Great Hall in complete chaos. "No!" Umbridge screamed with fury. "Find him! Find him! Head to the gates now. Go! Go!" They too tried to apparat, only to find that they couldn't because Hogwarts had already replaced the ward. "Give me your wand, Dumbledore," Umbridge demanded, as she rounded on him and stomped up to the head table. "I know you just replaced it." Albus chuckled. "I assure you, Madam Umbridge, I did no such thing, but please feel free to search my wand. Although, I'm afraid what you find may be slightly boring, to be honest." She glared at him, but snatched it out of his hands and handed it to a nearby, who looked furious at being outsmarted by a 15-year-old. They did find boring spells though. One was a toothbrushing charm, a hot air charm, a cleaning charm, and a water charm. Umbridge finally snatched the wand out of Vera's hand and threw it back to Albus in disgust. "Well, Potter couldn't have lifted the anti-disapparition jinx," she screamed. "Yes, he can. He's a founder. Hogwarts will allow both Harry and Mr. Ruffin to control the wards, especially now that they have told everyone who they are. They have just as much control as I do," Albus said calmly, which only made Umbridge glare at him. "Head to the gates. We are wasting time," she barked, and she and the others ran out of the Great Hall. "They will never find him," Godric muttered, as he chuckled loudly. "Why?" Draco asked. "Because he didn't go to the front gates," Blaise said, as he shot a knowing grin at Godric. They both knew Salazar landed in Godric's house in the forest. "He's bloody brilliant," Fred cried as tears poured down his face. "Totally wicked," Colin exclaimed. "Did you see the look on Umbridge's face?" Blaise asked as he grinned. "It was epic." Dennis laughed. "I don't think we've laughed this hard in a long time," Neville said, as they all snorted. Draco watched them all with wide eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to join in on their fun, because he was still very uncomfortable around them. Godric had already warded off several threats against his life, and Draco was grateful, but he didn't feel like he really belonged to the group. He still considered himself above most of them, but wasn't about to voice his opinion on the matter. Draco wasn't exactly happy having Godric as a babysitter, but he had made a promise to his mother and he wasn't about to break it. Besides, he liked the safety, seclusion, and luxury of the snake pit, and he wasn't about to do or say anything to get thrown out of it. They had already figured out that Montague was someone they needed to keep a close eye on, as well as several other 6th and 7th years, who were trying to gain their places at Voldemort's side. In their own year, they quickly learned that Pansy was all talk, while Millicent, Crabbe, and Goyle were just too stupid to really do anything. not appeared to be indifferent, but they decided to keep an eye on the boy just in case. "I'm still a bit miffed at Harry though," Hermione said with a slight frown, causing Draco to scoff silently at her. "He promised to show us the disappearing in a ball of flames thing last year, and he never did." Godric laughed. "It's not that hard honestly. Salazar came up with that to give off the illusion that he could come and go like a phoenix does." "Really?" she asked, and Godric nodded. "Yeah, all it is the flame freezing charm, the fire charm, and the disillusionment charm combined together. It's nothing more than smoke and mirrors," he said, and they all stared at him in shock. "That's brilliant!" Colin exclaimed. "Man, I have so much to learn." "We've been learning from him for 4 years, Colin, and we still don't know all his tricks." Blaise laughed. "That's good to know." Colin grinned, but then he laughed. "You know what's funny though?" "What?" They all chorused. If the Ministry had a theme song, it could be Symphony of Destruction by Megadeth, because they are going to get us all killed. Dennis burst out laughing. "Just like the Pied Piper, led rats through the streets. We dance like marionettes, swaying to the Symphony of Destruction." "Swaying to the Symphony of Destruction," Colin echoed with a grin. "The earth starts to rumble, world powers fall. Warring for the heavens, a peaceful man stands tall." "That would be Harry," Hermione said, causing the Creeveyes to stare at her in shock. "What?" she asked, throwing her arms up in the air. "My uncle listens to heavy metal, and that's one of his favorite songs." "I never pegged you for knowing something like that, Hermione," Colin said as he grinned at her. "Look at the two of you," she cried. "I never would have thought it either." "I'm confused," Neville said. "Sorry you guys." Dennis chuckled. "That is a song by a mole music band." "Oh, I just had an excellent idea for a prank," Colin said, looking at the twins with a grin. "Dennis and I could do it every morning at breakfast. We could get up and sing mole songs, then accuse Harry of confounding us." "Yeah, she can't punish us for that." Dennis laughed. "It worked for her." "That's excellent, my friends," George said with a grin. "But what songs?" Colin started off into space. "I don't know." "Enter Sandman by Metallica," Hermione said, causing them to stare at her again. She only glared at them though. "It talks about nightmares, and should give Umbridge a heart attack because of the lyrics." "But it might scare Professor Dumbledore too," Colin snorted. "We could do." "Oh, I have a good one," Dennis cried, cutting off his brother. "Season of the Witch by Donovan. Then we could shout about it being a mole song, and watch Umbridge go into shock thinking the moles know about witches and wizards." Magic Carpet Ride by Steppenwolf would be a good one too, Hermione offered. "But we could also do We Will Rock You by Queen. Everybody knows that song, and all the Muleborns and everyone else could get in on it too." "That would be brilliant," Dennis cried. "We can do pretty much anything by the Rolling Stones and Beatles too. That would go over real good with Umbridge." He snorted. "I have no idea what any of those songs are," Blaise said, looking at them all oddly. "They are all mole songs and bands." "Don't worry about it, Blaise." Hermione grinned. "I tried to do We Will Rock You during the first Gryffindor Quidditch match that I saw, but only Dean sung it with me," Colin said with a snort, which caused Hermione to giggle. "All right." Fred grinned. "We will let you handle all that because we are totally lost, but we give it the go-ahead." "Thanks," Colin said with a grin. "I think we should do Magic Carpet Ride tomorrow though. That should throw Umbridge off. We can build up to We Will Rock You because by then, everyone would have caught on and they can join us." "Good idea." Hermione grinned. Draco watched them all continue discussing their plans, but he only shook his head. He just didn't understand why these people were willing to draw attention to themselves. If it were him, He would be doing exactly what he had been doing since school started nearly 3 weeks ago, which was keeping his head down. "I know you're hiding something from me, Professor Robillard," Umbridge said, as she struggled to keep up with him in the corridor. He was headed back to his quarters after lunch that day, but Umbridge had caught up with him. Merlin had already left to go back to Camelot, but he told Salazar what happened after he apparated out of the Great Hall. It made Salazar laugh loudly. There weren't any students around right now though, so Salazar just rolled his eyes at the annoying woman. "How do you mean?" Salazar asked innocently, not bothering to slow his pace. "Why else would you have green flames in your door?" she wheezed. "I can't get in to evaluate you, so that leads me to believe that you aren't teaching what the Ministry deems appropriate." "You can think what you like, Madam Umbridge," he said dismissively, as he sharply turned the corner and headed up the next set of stairs. "I read your application," she suddenly hissed from the bottom step. "You're the son of a mole born under mole. You're less than a half-blood, and shouldn't even be here teaching the more respectable witches and wizards here at Hogwarts. You should go back to teaching the filthy mole trash in their schools." Salazar stopped in the middle of the staircase and turned around to give her a nasty grin, which caused her to curl her lip at him. "A bit prejudiced, are you?" Salazar asked. "It's hypocritical, considering who your mother and brother are. A mole and a squib, I believe, and dear old Daddy mops floors at the Ministry. TSK, TSK," Salazar said with a smirk, as her eyes widened in alarm. "Amazing what a person can learn with the proper motivation and resources. Tell me, Dolores," he sneered, "how much is Voldemort paying you to keep Fudge clueless? I could be wrong, but it seems to me that you might be working for Voldemort, given your unique view on things. It also would explain your bloodlust for Harry Potter. Do you want to be the one to turn Potter over to Voldemort?" "Lies," she hissed. "And I won't even bother acknowledging that question. Potter is nothing but a boy who will be caught soon and sent back to Azkaban, where he belongs." "Be careful," Salazar warned. "I studied under Salazar, and whether you believe it or not, Potter is Salazar Slytherin. Tread carefully, because he is not to be trifled with." "We will see about that," she said with a glare. "Don't threaten me, because I will see to it that you are removed from your position." "Good luck with that," he whispered with a feral grin. Then he turned and continued up the stairs, leaving Umbridge snarling as she watched him walk away.
I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Before we close the video, I noticed 53% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!